Welcome back to another episode of I Wish They Knew, a show where we share big ideas that deserve more attention in about the time it takes to enjoy a cup of coffee. I'm Joe Hirsch. Today's wish comes from Helen Basford. Helen is the global capability lead for coaching and feed forward at AstraZeneca, where she helps design the strategy and implementation of coaching practices. Feed forward, you had me right there. She's also an advanced professional coach, a coaching consultant, and an experienced facilitator with credentials from the International Coaching Federation, ICF, which, for those who don't know, that is the gold standard of all things coaching. And Helen is here today to talk about ways that all of us can create a culture of coaching within our organizations. Helen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Joe, and really a real pleasure to be here, honestly. Thank you for inviting me.
It is a pleasure to be connecting with you across time zones and continents. So what do you wish more people knew?
I think my wish would be that more organizations knew that to build a culture where you really focus on your people and enhance their development just isn't something that's just a nice to have, it's actually a business imperative. And that real link that it creates between the great people that you employ and bringing out the best in them, and also what's good for business. So that would be the bit that I would hope that more organizations would really get.
Bringing out the best in people, that's something that every organization would like to do. Many organizations aren't doing it, and it has to do with the way they're trying to measure for their success. At AstraZeneca, you took a hard look at some of the ways you were measuring for success. And there's been a lot of criticism directed at annual reviews. Some have tossed them all together. Some, still cling to them. When did it become clear to AstraZeneca and to you in your role there that in order to bring out the best in people, you needed to pivot? And I guess what factors drove that for you?
Yeah, I think there was there was already a sense that our performance appraisal system was just not really working for anyone. And I think our senior executive team did the right thing, which was to ask the hard question of, does this really work for you as individuals, for us as an organization? And really ask the question of the organization in a big global survey. And I think it was a resounding no, it doesn't work for us. No one's enjoying it. It was bureaucratic. It was always looking back in the past. It wasn't particularly helpful for most people. And so, that really started I guess, a trigger of events to say, if we really want to show up differently in the world, in this organization, in this industry, we need to start with ourselves. And I think that was where performance management was halted, and performance development really started a whole new era of development for our people.
Yeah, that is the key distinction, isn't it? Development as opposed to management.
Yes, it's all in the word. And I think, and in its true sense of the word, we really want people to feel like they are growing and developing at AstraZeneca. We bring in incredibly talented people. We want them to do their best work. So it's really in our best interest, but also our duty to ensure that we are creating the right environment for people to really flourish. And I think there's something here around recognizing that it's good for people. Yes, bringing out the best talent, absolutely, but the knock-on impact that then has on the business, it's a win-win. And I think there's something we just can all learn from that. And there's plenty of evidence to suggest that that's a good plan all round.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's almost like these assessments of how people are doing, they're coming too late and they're coming all at once. It's kind of like a feedback fire hose, where you're trying to put out the fires, but the building's already burned down. It's not at the right time. So you move towards a feed forward approach, something that I love to learn about, talk about, share with others. What were some of the key insights and impact that happened around that work for you at AZ?
I think it was a very collaborative part of what we needed to do. There was a clear strategy here. We needed to change systemically how we think about development, how we lean into it, what our philosophy was around it. And really, I think we very quickly pivoted in terms of scrapping the old rating system, which, let's be honest, no one likes to be given a number. I mean, we've all been there. We've all been on the receiving end of that. It's never a particularly inspiring. It's not particularly helpful. It doesn't give you an indication of where to from here. How do I continue to grow and develop? So that was all taken out. And we brought in, at the very base, was a system of quarterly check-ins, which was really each designed to have a slightly different focus, but ultimately to trigger that process of having a really engaging conversation with your line manager around your development, around your goals, around your long-term, medium-term, short-term development, and how you can really lean into that and keep that forward focus. How do we keep improving? How do we keep building? How do we keep developing? So it was important for us to get the system in place and the systemic view of this, linked to our reward system, linked to the development, leadership development, capability. So really was a very, a collaborative effort, not just driven by one part of the organization, but across the business and HR. So we've arrived at a point now, where are we, 4 years later, where we can see the benefits that have started to take place. And it's gone beyond just that very formal cycle into something quite wonderful.
So take us behind the scenes, and how does that process actually shape up? If you can, tell us about how these conversations are taking place, where they're taking place, who's scheduling them, how long are they lasting? I mean, give us sort of like, for those who want to move their talent management and development process forward,
Yeah,
how can they do that?
it's a great question. It's multifaceted. And I think that's the key to this, is that you need to think about it as an entire strategy. This is about having the system in place. So yes, there is a system that will nudge you, prompt you, guide you. But we also have a very engaging comms and engagement team that actually help us to understand, what do those great conversations really sound like? What's our expectation for those? How do we, what should we do to prepare for them? How should we show up for those conversations? So there is a system that helps us to do that, and a system that in the background that prompts that on a quarterly basis. We then support that system by all of the capability build. So how do we ready the managers to have those conversations? And how do we ready our employees to know what they are showing up for and also prepare? Because really this is about driving their development. It shouldn't come from the line manager. It should actually come from the employees themselves, because it's their growth and their development. So, if you had to think about it, there's the system, there's the capability build that happens to support managers, leaders, and their line reports to be able to do this well. Lots of coaching cards and workshops and ability to really practice this and get better at it over time. But also we do a lot of work to really educate, I would say, the organization around what we mean by performance development and what that looks like at AstraZeneca. How it's underpinned by a coaching approach, and why feed forward is such a critical element of this. And I know that that's your favorite word. So happy to dwell on that for a bit, but yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to get into how feed forward is helping to drive that, but I'm very curious about these systems and supports that are in place here. And you mentioned something about equipping managers to have those conversations, first by building their own capabilities to lead those conversations with greater skill and comfort. How are you doing that exactly? Because a lot of managers want to do more for their people. They don't necessarily know how to get started for themselves.
And I would say we actually have a very generous offering in this space, because it's from a number of different angles. We offer very engaging workshops where they can understand what those kinds of conversations, how to set your team up for success, how to set those goals, how to make sure that there are stretch goals in there, and that there's a longer term view of their actual career development, not just for the annual sort of cycle, if you like. We have workshops, we have coaching cards, we have courses such as manager as coach and leader as coach, because it's really about employing those coaching competencies to create that right environment. So there's a build on this as they enter into the organization. There's a, this is how it kind of works here. And we're going to help you to show up in the best way that you can, with practice, through master coaches, with some support guides, but equally prepare the employees to do the same. So very, very tactical in terms of, how do I have this conversation? How do I start this conversation? What are the words that I use? How do I ask a great question to start with? How do I frame this? So we give all of those conversation starters and coaching approach techniques that they can keep practicing over time and keep developing with support. And that's the sort of foundational phase. But obviously, as they mature into their management leadership journeys, we have other areas where we keep dialing that up through manager as coach, through leader as coach, and through a lot of our manager and leader development work. So they are very much supported, encouraged to really lean into these competencies and practice them. We know it's, no one arrives in these situations kind of having all the knowledge. We're all learners in this space. So the culture that we're trying to create is very much a learning culture, of which coaching is a big part of it.
Yeah. So continuous conversations and a continuous commitment to learning how to manage and master those conversations.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. But coaching, it cuts both ways, right? So along with all of the effort to help support and build the capacity of managers, you mentioned that there's a role for the employees here too. So how does AstraZeneca, I guess, develop a sense of coachability within the employees so they're getting the most out of these conversations as well?
It's a really great question. Especially at the beginning stages, when you change, you make quite a big global radical change of this nature. If you suddenly show up to a conversation with your line manager and they're suddenly asking you all these questions which they didn't do before, you tend to arouse suspicion in all of this. So I think there is something around helping employees know what to expect in these conversations. We did quite a bit of work to help them to see what it could be, what it could sound like, what they can expect from their line manager, and also what they should prepare to come into that. So think of the questions they want to ask. And I think, requesting feed forward, what could I do to improve? What do I need to know about myself to move this further along? And I think when you create the right environment for those conversations, it becomes a very intentional way of thinking about your development and taking ownership of it, which is different from just a check-in or let me replay all the things that I did or didn't like about last year, but rather, where are we going this year and how do we make the best of it and really dial up your personal development in the space and allow you to be at your best.
Yeah, what's really great about Feed Forward is that it's about partnership and not power. So these dynamics like automatically shift from what I'm doing to another person to what I'm doing for the other person. And that sounds like it's baked in very well into the system.
It is, but these things also require practice. You can build the system, you can give all the support, you can really lean into it, but it does happen over time. And some people have to kick the habits of a lifetime. They may have only have known or experienced one way of doing performance appraisals. So we really had to help them to reframe what they were doing in that conversation and what they were there for. And you're quite right. It's in service of someone. It's that co-creation of partnership. It's, I respect you enough to really give you some observations or things that I'm noticing or some feed forward from others, because my intention is that I want you to be at your best. I want you to get better at this, or I want you to develop beyond where you are today. And we see a future for you here. And I think those are messages that when people start to trust that and they start to feel that actually this is a good thing, you start to see them seek it out. What else could I do? What else should I know? What else can I learn here? And so that culture of curiosity starts to become the norm. And yes, it didn't come right overnight. It never does. It's never going to be a quick solution. It's rather something that you build over a period of time and keep reinforcing and developing.
So coaching is really about driving a relationship and not a rating at the end of the day. But for a lot of folks, that rating, that measure is still important. And you had touched on this earlier in terms of how it affects other areas of the employees' career development, compensation, other matters like that. How are you looking at measurement here? Are you looking at adjacent measures like engagement, or have AstraZeneca found specific measures that they're using to track and ultimately manage success?
So we do look at a number of different measures. We're pretty big on following the science in our organization. So as one of our core values, we all try and hold ourselves to that same account. So thinking very large, we have our employee surveys. They happen twice a year. These are our pulse surveys. They get an ultimate read on the sort of temperature check of the organization, if you like. But those kinds of questions that we ask there is really about how are these conversations going for you? Are you on the receiving end of them from your line manager? And we can see that we absolutely can. We've got a 70% increase with line managers now feeling much more confident to have those conversations. So we can see the confidence levels rising. We can see that actually when it comes to performance development, we've had a 45% positive shift towards performance development. Whereas that was not something that was visible in the old days.
Yeah, that's a huge jump. Yeah.
Yeah, people look forward to it. And I'd say we asked the question around development conversations, and we can see that 89% of our entire employee base are saying that they've had at least one development conversation with their line manager, at least one. So it's constantly nudging that forward and really working on that. But also remembering that it's not limited to quarterly check-ins or that cycle. We really want people to go beyond that. We want this to be coaching in the everyday flow of work, delivering feed forward on a consistent basis, not storing it up for the quarterly check-in, but having that continual dialogue. So what became really critical for us was to ensure that we're building the capability, and we look at other measures to look at how we're building that capability around 5 core coaching behaviors, if you like. And we're seeing across the board, it's becoming very consistent, a 12% increase in those behaviors across those competencies. And we're not asking the managers and the leaders, we're asking the teams of those managers and leaders as to how these behaviors are showing up for them. And that's a really critical part of that, because you avoid the overclaim and you avoid, people sort of self-promoting. But we really ask the tough questions of, is it happening for you? Are you experiencing these development conversations? Are you receiving feed forward? Are you receiving opportunities for growth? Celebrating successes? There's all sorts of questions that we ask. And when you start to get thousands of responses over time, it really does create a pretty convincing picture when you align that with engagement scores and promotion rates and the sort of all the collective measures around that. It tells a pretty convincing story.
So I think it's fair to say that a coaching culture isn't something that we find, it's something we create.
Absolutely. There's an intention behind it.
Yeah.
These are not everyday practices that just come naturally. It's up to everyone to really pay attention, to lean in, to practice, to adopt that learner mindset and thinking, okay, this is a little different for me, but I'm going to give it a go, and share that with your teams. Say, look, this is new for me, but I'm gonna take a different approach to this meeting or this catch up or one-to-one or whatever it might be, and just keep building on that over time. And that's where you start to see the impact of this. You start to see, we've seen a number of different ways in which AstraZeneca is really being very well received in terms of its development and being a great place to work.
Well, you've helped to create a culture of connection and of continuous learning. And I feel like I've connected to a great way of thinking about how to build these cultures through coaching. Helen Basford, thank you for sharing your wish with us today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me, Joe.